when Artemis 1 blasted off towards the moon. I mean, what a sight. But as the Orion capsule got closer, it started doing something, well, something a little weird. Instead of flying straight there, it took this long, looping, almost scenic route. So what's going on here? That's what we're going to break down, the incredible science behind this cosmic road trip.
Okay, right off the bat, here's the puzzle. Back in the day, the Apollo missions, they took about 6 days to get to the moon and back. 6 days! Artemis 1, a whopping 26 days. That's over 4 times longer. So you've got to ask, with all of our incredible modern technology, why on Earth did it take us so much longer to visit our closest neighbor?
And yeah, that's the big question we're tackling. It gets even stranger when you remember that the rocket that launched Artemis, the SLS, is actually more powerful than the legendary Saturn V from the Apollo era. You'd think more power means a faster trip, right? So what gives? Why the long, winding road?
All right, to figure this out, you first have to realize we're talking about 2 completely different game plans. Apollo's path was basically a drag race, a straight shot, pedal to the metal, get there as fast as you can. Artemis, on the other hand, its path was more like a carefully choreographed cosmic dance.
Now, like I said, your first thought is probably, hey, a more powerful rocket should mean a faster trip. But that's just it. The fact that the SLS is the more powerful rocket tells us right away that brute force isn't the answer here. Something else is going on, something a lot more clever.
So, if it wasn't about raw power, then what was it about? Well, it turns out that in spaceflight, the true cost of any trip is measured in a totally different and way more important currency.
And that currency is called delta V. The simplest way to think about it is as your spacecraft's total budget for changing its speed. Every maneuver, every change in direction has a delta V price tag. And you pay that price by burning fuel. So just like with real money, if your delta V budget is tight, you can't afford the direct, expensive route. You gotta find the cheaper, scenic one.
And this is where we find our biggest clue. The key difference isn't in those giant rockets that launched from Earth. No, it's in the capsules themselves, the command modules that actually made the journey to the moon.
Check this out. It all boils down to 2 different design philosophies. The Apollo capsule was built to be small and super lightweight. That meant they could strap a massive service module to it, just packed with fuel. The result? A really high delta V budget. Artemis's Orion capsule, on the other hand, is much bigger and roomier inside. It's designed for long-duration missions in the future. But that extra space came at a cost. A smaller service module with way less fuel. The result? Orion has less than half the delta V of Apollo.
And that single trade-off changes everything. See, the Apollo capsule had a hard limit of about 14 days of life support. That's it. They had to take the fastest, most fuel-guzzling route possible. They literally had no other choice. But Orion? It didn't have that problem. Its issue wasn't a lack of time, it was a lack of fuel, or, delta V. It couldn't afford to just hit the brakes and drop into orbit around the moon like Apollo did.
So, with a tight delta V budget, how did NASA get Orion all the way to the moon and have it stick around long enough to actually run tests? This is where the real genius comes in.
They chose a very special destination, something called a distant retrograde orbit, or DRO. Think of it as this huge, lazy orbit really far away from the moon. In this special spot, the gravity from the Earth and the moon kind of balance each other out, making it incredibly stable. A spacecraft can just hang out there for a super long time without burning much fuel at all. It was the perfect parking spot for testing all of Orion's systems.
But getting into that orbit without a ton of fuel? That required a stroke of genius. Instead of hitting the brakes with its engine, Orion aimed for a super close shave of the moon, just 100 kilometers above the surface. By flying at the moon head-on, it used the moon's own gravity as a giant free cosmic brake, slowing the capsule down without burning a drop of fuel. Then, a quick engine burn at its closest point kicked it into a big, long oval orbit, and one more tiny puff of the engine at the farthest point made that orbit perfectly circular. It was an absolutely brilliant maneuver that saved a ton of delta V.
And get this orbit was so enormous that it took Orion 12 days to go around the moon just once. That gave NASA this huge window of time to test every little system on the capsule, a luxury the Apollo missions, with their ticking clock, never had.
So getting there was incredibly clever. But what about coming home? To escape the moon's pull and head back to Earth, Orion needed one last critical engine burn. And once again, NASA used a cool physics trick to get the most bang for its buck.
They waited until Orion was at its absolute closest point to the moon before firing that engine. Why? It's because of something called the Oberth effect. The basic idea is that a rocket engine gives you a much bigger kick when the rocket itself is already moving really, really fast.
Here, think of it like this. You're at the airport. If you walk on one of those slow-moving walkways, you get a little boost to your speed. But if you walk at that exact same pace on one of those super-fast walkways, your final speed is way, way higher. You get a much bigger boost for the exact same amount of walking. That's pretty much the Oberth effect.
And a spacecraft is moving at its fastest when it's deep inside a gravity well. You know, like when it's doing that close flyby of the moon. So by firing the engine at that precise moment of maximum speed, Orion got the biggest possible push from its remaining fuel, which was just enough to fling it perfectly on course for home.
So let's wrap this all up. That crazy, long journey? It wasn't a mistake or a flaw, it was a brilliant feature. It was a clever, elegant solution to Orion's low delta-V budget. By using the moon's own gravity to do the heavy lifting and the Oberth effect to get a free kick on the way out, NASA didn't just get to the moon on the cheap. They created the perfect long-duration test flight. It was a total masterclass in orbital mechanics, proving that in space, sometimes being clever is way more important than just having brute force.
And that kind of leaves us with this really cool thought. This whole mission proved that sometimes the path you take is just as important as the rocket you're riding in. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other seemingly impossible trips to other planets, maybe even beyond, could suddenly become possible not with bigger rockets, but just by finding a smarter, more ingenious route to get there.